Good evening, everyone, and a very warm welcome to today's IMC session on mentoring for future leadership, building resilient leaders in an AI-enabled world. My name is Sabah, and I will be your host this evening. It is a pleasure to welcome all our participants joining us from different professions, industries, and parts of the world. Thank you for taking the time today to be with us. As organizations navigate rapid technological advancement, changing workforce expectations, and increasingly complex leadership challenges, the need to develop adaptable, resilient, and future ready leaders has never been greater. At IMC, we believe mentoring plays a critical role in preparing individuals for these evolving realities. Effective mentoring not only supports professional growth, but also helps build confidence, strengthen decision making, and cultivate the leadership capabilities needed for the future. Today's session will explore how mentoring can help organizations strengthen leadership pipelines, support emerging leaders through transition, and prepare talent to thrive in an AI enabled world. We are privileged to be joined by a highly respected educational leader whose career has spanned continents, cultures, and decades of leadership development. Before we begin, just a few quick housekeeping points. Please note that this session is being recorded. Participants are requested to keep themselves muted during the speaker's address. You may share your questions in the chat box throughout the session. We will have a dedicated Q&A segment towards the end where we will take questions from the audience. Now, it gives me an immense pleasure to introduce our esteemed speaker for today. Brian Cooklin is a highly accomplished educational leader and a former executive director of Nord Anglia Education, one of the world's leading international education organizations. Following his master's degree in history and English from the University of Glasgow, along with teacher training and education qualifications, Brian began his professional journey as an English teacher in Scotland. His career then progressed through headship and school principal roles in Scotland, Mexico, and Hong Kong, where he successfully led diverse educational communities and developed a strong reputation for leadership excellence. Building on this experience, Brian went on to manage groups of schools and regional leadership teams across India and Europe before assuming the role of executive director, where he was responsible for integrating and supporting schools globally. Alongside his extensive leadership experience, mentoring has remained a central passion throughout his career. He has dedicated significant time to supporting leaders, leadership teams, and organizations around the world, helping them navigate change, develop talent, and build sustainable leadership capacity. Today, Brian will share his insights on how mentoring can strengthen leadership development, build resilience, and prepare organizations and individuals for the future work in an increasingly AI enabled world. Brian, we are delighted to have you with us today. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Saba, and welcome to the webinar, everyone, and good day to you wherever you are around the world. As Saba said in the introduction, this is about mentoring for future leaders and developing a talent at a time when there's a great deal of stress, a great deal of energy being expended, and many people feeling the pressure of trying to cope with business, institutional, geopolitical, economic, climate change, and anything else you like to think of. And there is, of course, the blessed AI. So, with all of those things challenging the current business situation and in organizations and institutions around the world, it's really important to see what the future holds in terms of how individuals can progress and how companies can help them do it. It's a very important development to consider mentoring as your main weapon in dealing with the onslaught of these various changes. And so if I could have the next slide, please, Saba. The reason this is important, you'll see a number of reasons listed here, is because of some of the issues we've already touched upon. Many organizations are finding it increasingly difficult to get people to apply for leadership or to continue with their company because they're being recruited elsewhere, since those skills are in great demand and in short supply. This has been exacerbated by the effects of technological development, AI being the prime one in our minds at the moment, but there are other digital developments which have had consequences in how companies cope and develop in this changing situation. Every organization I've been in charge of, I've tried to introduce a coaching culture, because coaching and mentoring for me are the two most important and significant ways of building the success of an organization. And what do I mean by that? Well, I think if you can develop a coaching culture, it's a great boost to morale. It means everyone in the organization feels valued, everyone feels they can contribute, and everyone feels there's someone, at least for them, who can look after their development, support them, and help them to the next stage if necessary. So the coaching side of things is one thing, but we need to be clear what the difference is. Coaching is where you're trying to encourage the individual to find the answers for themselves and look at their particular approaches and ideas and how they can be developed. Mentoring is where you're making use of experience, knowledge, skills, understanding to share that expertise with newer colleagues, younger colleagues who are starting out on a leadership journey. So we need to be quite clear of the difference between the two. But you look at this slide and you'll see some of the challenges that we are referring to. One in particular is how we keep the best talent in our organizations, and it's becoming increasingly difficult. And the way that we do that often is through the quality and caliber of the professional development that we provide as organizations. You may have your own programs and you may have a pathway that traditionally was there for members of staff to follow. And they may still work for some people, but the chances are they don't work for everyone. And the chances are they are not producing the numbers you're looking for. I am regularly contacted by various companies and leadership teams and groups around the world saying how much harder it's becoming to keep people and to get people to apply in the first place. So people who are suitably qualified for leadership positions are in great demand, and their numbers are thin compared in many cases to what was the case in the past. What we're really looking at is an attempt to embed coaching and mentoring and to develop that culture within the company. This means developing things like a growth mindset. What is the best I can do? How can I be my best self? What can I do to improve productivity, effectiveness, how I manage situations and manage people? And peer mentoring and the capacity to help each other in this development is absolutely critical. All the research shows from University of Durham, for example, that people make the most headway and the most development from their peers. Because someone who has done your job, is doing your job, is working alongside you, is more likely to understand the challenges, the risks, the difficulties, and also to be able to share what would be a way of approaching these that would make a difference. So what we need to look at is how we can develop that leadership approach within our organizational setups. And whatever your organogram is and how these particular responsibilities are shared out, I would suggest cross-functional leadership support is particularly valuable. So a fundamental question I often ask is, do you know who you've got? In other words, who are the members of your team? Who are you managing? What is their role? And what else can they bring to the table? One of my first leadership roles was in a different country, a different culture, a completely different situation, and managing areas I'd never managed before. My way of dealing with it was to interview the 285 members of staff individually. And by doing that, I got to first base in understanding who was working in that institution. And it was fascinating because I discovered people in fairly low grade jobs, for example, security guards, who was a fully trained architect, a class assistant who was a fully trained child psychologist. And their skills in those areas, knowledge and understanding, were not being utilized. So I was able to immediately harness that. So I'm giving that as an example of the importance of knowing exactly who you've got. And also, the better you can know the people that you're going to mentor or that you're arranging mentoring for, then the more likely you are to get the greatest benefit from it. Because it's really important to understand where they're coming from. And this kind of cross-functional support helps because there is a tendency for functions and departments to work in silos, that HR doesn't have too much to do with IT, or they don't with operations or finance or whatever. But the truth of the matter is, in this age, the reward is for agility and adaptability. And we can learn so much from each other, even though we're not necessarily doing exactly the same jobs. So I would stress that in my experience, those approaches of peer mentoring, cross-functional leadership in coaching and mentoring works extremely well. You can look at the example of Microsoft under Satya Nadella, where the entire approach to this was aligned with the transformation of the organization. Could I have the next slide, please? Well, why does mentoring work? Well, first and foremost, it helps to make sure that people are valued and to make them feel as if someone is taking care of their development. I don't know about you, but quite often when I've gone into a leadership position, basically nothing happened to support me for that. Quite often, when I assumed a new role, my first reaction was to think, oh no, why did I apply for this? I had no idea it was going to be as big a job, or as challenging, or as difficult. And to a large extent, I've spent time in my career trying to smooth people's paths so they don't feel like that when they take up a new role. It takes time, and it is after a period of time that you realize you're coping with all of this and then begin to look at the next level and could I go for this next job? So that area of confidence building is absolutely critical. When I was training aspiring leaders before, I used to have a phrase that men are confidently misinformed and women are misinformed about their confidence. And what I meant by that generalization was that many men very quickly, without thinking, without even reading the job description, immediately applied for any promotion or new role, not thinking about what was involved in it. And that became obvious when you asked them questions at an interview. Many women, meanwhile, lacked confidence to apply, although they had the skills, the ability, the qualification, and the experience. Because often they would say, I'm not ready yet, or I need more training, or I have young children. And of course, as if the male doesn't have those things to contend with as well. So it's very important to understand the significance of building confidence, to reassure people that they are capable of this role, and of course, to give them those opportunities that allow them to build that confidence. And you can do it in a number of ways. Often I would have younger, less experienced members of staff shadowing a more experienced member of staff. Or I would create a temporary acting post, often not paid, but to let them practice that particular area. Another way of doing it is to give them a unique, specific project to lead as an inexperienced member of staff and see how well they can deliver in that area. It's a way of testing and checking and building their confidence and resilience because they need to be able to learn from failure, from making mistakes, and how you recover. They need to learn how to own mistakes and be accountable and to hold others accountable too. So, those kind of approaches ensure that you have been building confidence and resilience, which is critical for the success of any organization. Passing on the knowledge about the company, the organization, the institution is also extremely important. Quite often, we have been careless in losing people from our companies who have had years of experience and understanding of how things work and how the company ticks. Each and every organization has its own way of working, it has its own set of values and principles which drive the organization from the beginning. They might have come from the founder, it might be because of the type of institution it is, it may be the people who are leading it have very clear sense of direction and expectations, which is important to be communicated to everyone at all times. So transferring that understanding and knowledge from one set of leaders to a new set of leaders is extremely important for the continued success of the organization. And this type of mentoring also is significant because it supports people as they move through the organization and on to the next level. A major part of your job as a leader or manager is to talent spot. But it's not just to spot the talent, it's also to make sure that the talent's developed in the right way. So the sort of professional development, the training opportunities, the access to careers, the access to other qualifications externally, universities, colleges, diplomas, those kind of supports make a huge difference in terms of developing the skills, the knowledge, the understanding, and the confidence of those people in your company. Next slide, please. Well, just as the last one was about developing emerging leaders and linking them with experienced executives, this is about buddying in particular. If you want a model of how well that was worked, you look at General Electric's original, what's called the Crotonville leadership model. You can look at that in detail. They had a very well-developed and detailed system like that. In this slide, we're looking at how do you support these emerging leaders? And you do it in a variety of ways. If I take the example from the UK of Teach First, this was a development to persuade people from different backgrounds, industries, and who were qualifying from universities with top degrees to come into teaching. Because in many countries, Britain included, we've seen a drop in the number of people applying for training as teachers. And that's happened for a number of reasons. So this particular scheme, Team First, was designed to have experienced leaders mentoring these new teachers through classroom leadership, developing their decision making and their resilience. Again, that word appears because it's so important in a time of great change and uncertainty. So that sort of support for emerging leaders is again critical. If you become a leader for the first time, you'll know that when you worked on your own, you were responsible for your own targets, your own situation. As soon as you have to manage people, even if you're only managing one other person, it becomes more complicated. And the more people you're managing and the more parts of a business you're involved in, the more complex and difficult that becomes. Because suddenly you have to manage people. And that can be the most challenging and also the most rewarding aspect of your job. The ability to get the best out of people is a daily challenge because what you can get someone to do today successfully, you may not be able to get them to do tomorrow. And this is to do with the human dynamic. And it comes back to this point of how well do you know the individuals you're working with? Do you know the right language to use? Can you read the signals from body language about what's working or not working? Can you see what support is needed by that colleague in order to do this job more effectively? So it's very much about managing people. When it comes to first time in leadership, it's about being there in the background. It's not about taking decisions for them. There's a great temptation when you've done that role and you're overseeing somebody else doing it, that you get frustrated or feel they're not doing it the way you would have done it, and you jump in and change it and decide you know better. And that might be true and that might be accurate, but it's not helping that colleague, and it's certainly not developing their confidence or helping them to transition from where they were to their new position. So, to some extent, without it damaging the business, of course, you have to let people make mistakes and learn from them. Now, if they're not learning from them, that's a different issue. But it's also about you ensuring that you give the right advice and the right pointers so that they do learn from those mistakes and make a better job of it. Decision making under pressure is difficult for everyone, but it comes again from a knowledge, an understanding, a confidence about what you're doing and how effective you are in doing it. If you're basing your decisions on clear strategy or on clear expectations, direction, and you're working towards the goals, the aims, the values, the principles of the organization, you're making being made on a sound basis. And that is what you have to depend upon. Developing executive presence, or sometimes called gravitas, is difficult, but stems from building experience and confidence. People need to look at you and feel that you are calm and reasonable in a crisis. You need to imbue that sense of calmness and reasonableness to other people taking those leadership roles, because they need to be in charge of a situation and dealing with it, no matter how complex it is. And therefore, they need to be very sure that they are heading in the right direction. They need your support to make sure of that. Because again, we come back to our current position where the old certainties, the old things you were sure of, that you knew this particular logistical setup always works, or this supply chain's always there, or these people are always in the position. Those things are disappearing fast under different pressures. And therefore, we need people who are able to be agile and to be able to cope with whatever is thrown at them. Could I have the next slide, please? Now, the biggest challenge of the moment is, of course, AI. Uh, and as some of you might be aware, I'm very active in LinkedIn, and you can see a number of my short pieces on AI and AI leadership. And if you want to see more about that or about the things I've said in various articles, then you can look at what's on my website, briancooklin.com, for any further tips, advice, or pointers. But fundamentally, we need to prepare everyone for AI, and in particular leaders, because they're going to be responsible in the future for how this is going to impact the way the institution, the organization, the company, the group, whatever it is you're working for or with, and the way they're going to develop in this rapidly changing situation. So it's important that the organization has a framework, it has a clear AI strategy, has policies, procedures, processes, has codes of conduct, and that everyone in the organization understands their part in it. We need to tackle this the same way you do cybersecurity or safeguarding in different institutions, so that absolutely everyone, no matter what their role is, understands the impact of AI on their job, their team, their organization, their output, their outcomes. So, for that to happen, everyone in leadership has to have a good grasp of it. It's not enough to have it on paper. It's not enough to refer to a policy document. It needs to be lived on a daily basis. What does this mean? What does it look like? How would I recognize it? What impact is it having on me and my job? So it's very important that all that is in place before you start talking about how you're going to lead. So leading hybrid teams, significant. It's very significant and topical at the moment. For example, in the Middle East, because of the war situation, where people have found themselves stranded in different places and countries or having to work from different countries remotely. In other countries, it's happened by choice, where teams have decided they work so many days in the office and the rest of the time working from home or hubs in a different area. And this kind of model is developing worldwide in different ways for different reasons. But it is a different type of leadership because you're not seeing people face to face on a daily basis. So, how do you communicate? How do you ensure that everyone feels valued, included, and that you're taking their perspectives into consideration as you push the company on? So, managing those teams, managing the change that's there, is a significant challenge in itself, and it's a daily one. And remember the difference between managing and leading. The managing part is the operational, the daily use, and the leading part is the strategy that informs it. Why am I managing the way that I am? Because this is the strategy we have as a company, and this is the direction we're going in, and these are the strategic intentions that I need to fulfill through my leadership and through my support of people into leadership. The use of AI responsibly. What's the best way to use it in the circumstances of our company? How can I make sure that it's working for the benefit of everyone here? How do I know that we're keeping abreast of it with the various changes? Agentic AI, for example, the use of other forms of technology, robotics, um, the metaverse, VR, AR, a variety of digital software that you could employ in your given area. Is it being used in a coordinated, coherent fashion? Is it ad hoc? Are we just grabbing the next new thing because we're worried we'll be left behind? This is why the strategy and the application of it is so important to get right in the first place, so that you're not stampeded into making decisions, nor are you left behind as the troglodytes who didn't change fast enough and disappeared into the dim mists of time. So, balancing what's going on in terms of automation with human leadership is so important. And this is why I'm stressing about mentoring, because mentoring cannot be done by a chatbot or a robot. Yes, you can get prompts. Yes, you can get slides. Yes, you can get ChatGPT giving you a list. You can do all of those things. It's not the same as talking through a situation with somebody who knows exactly what you're facing and why it's giving you a headache. So the human leadership aspect is the most significant. The power of effective, valuable feedback cannot be underestimated. You find the right words to say in the right situation to the right person at the right time is worth its weight in gold. And what you're doing all the time with this approach in mentoring and giving examples of what people will do is to build that adaptability. It's to get people to understand I need to be ready to change. I can't treat every situation as being exactly the same. In my view, you never stop learning. Every situation that you're faced with, there could be similarities to things you've had to deal with in the past, but there are always nuances and there are always differences. Again, because of human dynamic, you're dealing with different people in a different country, in different cultures, from a different background, with a different business expertise, whatever it might be, you cannot take it for granted it's going to be the same. So the adaptability is the major skill to have. And it's been my view for a long time. Back at Millennium, when we had future conferences and we had futurologists speaking at conferences saying this is what the future is going to be like, and they would list 20, 30 skills that we'd need to have. And when it was my turn to speak, I used to say there is only one skill you need, and that's adaptability. Because the one thing that's guaranteed just now is change. So if we're faced with a lot of change, rather than let it overwhelm us, we need to be able to pick and choose how we're going to approach it in a comfortable way for us that adapts what we're doing, adopts and changes accordingly so that we can deal with this in a positive way. Can I have the next slide, please? And one last example of that last slide actually was if you're looking for companies that have done this successfully building new talent. IBM, for example, great believer in reverse mentoring. And in my education background, student agency, similar approach. Because students often knew more about the technology than staff did. And in IBM's case, new members of staff, younger or less experienced members of staff, might have a stronger and deeper understanding of AI and new technology than the leadership. So it's not a one-way street. Mentoring can be beneficial for your experienced staff as well. If we look then here in this slide about embedding the talent, a good example would be Deloitte's sponsorship and mentoring for leadership diversity. And this was their talent strategy that they used. And they used it to ensure that there were pathways to promotion for anyone who showed the capacities and the skills, regardless of their background, their ethnicity, or any other feature that they could have been discriminated against in the past. And it was to help develop succession planning. And the difference in their scheme was that they successfully integrated all of these elements of succession planning, retention, diversity, mentoring into one package. And ideally, that's how you want things to end up. But this takes time. This is not an overnight cure. It's not a panacea, nor is it a silver bullet. None of those cliches apply. What it is a step-by-step approach to get you into the right place. Establish the principles, as I've said, the framework, the leadership approach, and take it from there. Because succession planning is often not done well. Again, because we're not able to hold on to some of our best people. So the answer is the whole package of measures, which includes the type of professional development, mentoring, support, coaching that would be available, that they're not going to get elsewhere, and therefore they would want to stay with you. The strategies you have for retention, of course, about salary, benefits, packages, but it's not only about that, it's also about things like well-being. The diversity in leadership. Are people seeing role models? Do they see people like them in the position? Because that's very important for people to understand. Yes, I could succeed. Somebody like me coming from a poor background with not a degree from a top university, but I can still get into leadership because they've seen that I've got the talents necessary. That cross-generational mentoring is incredibly valuable because sharing that knowledge and understanding, that buddying approach, mentoring approach, is the most significant way to gain value in the company. And you have, of course, to measure this mentoring impact. I have never surveyed staff or taken any kind of measurement of staff opinion and temperature on the issue of mentoring and not been blown away by the positive response and the examples that people were giving me of the difference it's made in doing their job. And sometimes it's been incremental. People have not realized bit by bit. For example, I make great use of storytelling. It's how I would teach as a teacher. It's how I would sell in marketing. It's how I would package the company in describing and explaining to others. And I remember one colleague saying to me years later that at first she didn't think she'd learnt very much from me because I was always telling stories. And it was only later, years later, that it dawned on her that these stories all had a profound point, meaning, and actually, in an accumulated way, made a huge difference to how she led and managed people herself. So it's not always that everything has to be in 6 foot high letters, but it is important that you find your way to add to that mentoring impact and, of course, to measure it. Next slide, please. So, the key takeaways. Well, if you look at this question of integrating leadership development, then have a look at Unilever's program because they integrated and incorporated their digital learning developments and their coaching challenges into this leadership development program. I think it's always good to look at what other people are doing and to find out what's going on in other parts of the world. So you see in the area of AI, for example, you see somewhere like Abu Dhabi with a university for the AI producing research and giving evidence-based aspects to work on. And as a result, you see the development in education terms of AI literacy courses for children from a young age there. Similarly, Microsoft's support of Estonia and the way that they are developing Copilot for use by citizens in all manner of ways in every aspect of government in the country. Singapore, likewise, has invested heavily in those kind of integrated approach of how AI is going to impact on people's lives. So really important to look at how these different examples work. None of this is a one-off program. Mentoring is there to support leadership mobility, and it has to be constant and it has to be something permanently that you do. It's not something for this year and let's leave it in the future because I'm too busy. If you're not using mentoring as a strategic leadership tool, then you're missing out, and so is your company, and you'll be left behind. The important thing is to remember it's strategic, to make sure that this is about developing future-ready leaders. It's to help you keep people you want to keep who can contribute to the development of the company and the success of the organization as a whole. It's there to make sure that you have a pipeline, that you've got resilient leaders lining up for the various positions. And by the way, it's really important to appreciate you're not in the business of cloning. So please don't pick people who look like you, sound like you, act like you, and think the same way as you. We all need to be challenged by different perspectives. Now, while you don't want someone who's a troublemaker and is going to oppose you at every turn, you do need people who are going to ask the right questions and challenge you as necessary. So, for example, if you have developed coaching and mentoring, if you have an open-minded approach, and that's what you've encouraged in others, then you will always get the different perspectives offered because people don't feel under threat, they don't feel bullied, they don't feel that leadership is not interested in their opinion. The exact opposite. They will feel that they can make a difference, that they can influence decisions and judgments, and that they can help the company to progress. So what I want you to think about is to think of one challenge that you're facing at the moment. Think of a mentoring practice that you can see would work well, and about one change that you could implement that would make this happen. In other words, how can I use mentoring to cope with the challenge that I'm thinking and I'm facing at present? I think that would be a significant way for you as a first step to adopt these approaches. But at the end of the day, this has to be tailored to your situation, what you're facing, and what you're working with. If you're working as a mentor with people, then you don't have the detailed knowledge of the organization that they have. So you have to start from a position of getting to know what they want from this situation, and then you tailoring the advice you would give to make sure you're offering them something practical that they can make use of. And that's what I hope I've done today, is to give you something practical. And my last slide is simply to say at this stage, thank you.
As we come to the end of today's session, I, Sabah, would like to extend our sincere gratitude to Brian for sharing his invaluable insights, experiences, and perspective with all of us. Brian, thank you for such an inspiring session on the future of leadership and transformative role mentoring can play in developing resilient and capable leaders. To all our participants, thank you for your presence, engagement, and thoughtful contributions throughout the sessions. We hope today's session has provided practical insights and fresh perspectives that you can apply within your own organizations, mentoring relationships, and leadership journeys. On behalf of the International Mentoring Center, thank you once again for joining us. We look forward to welcoming you in our future IMC events and conversations. Have a wonderful evening ahead. Thank you.
Very much, Saba.